Welcome to the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame. Today I'm going to introduce Chapter 15, and I'm going to be doing longer videos on each of the three topics that I'm going to be discussing here, but I wanted to do kind of a teaser, well, a little bit more than a teaser, but really go through a basic understanding of all three of the topics I'm going to be going into for this particular chapter. I'm going to be talking about the 1983 Topps Darryl Strawberry XRC. I'm also going to be talking about Bowman, not the Topps brand. I'm going to be talking about the actual Bowman gum that came before Topps. But I'm also going to be elevating the 1990 Upper Deck Reggie Jackson autograph to the binder of fame. And the Reggie autograph is a really unique card in baseball cards, in part because it didn't really lead to anything. It's a very unique card in terms of, at the time, what it meant is very different from what it means today. And for many of us, we remember what it was at the time, but now it just doesn't look the same because it looks like it's part of lineage that it's actually not. It is touted as the first autograph in packs, which I don't believe is the case. I think that the basketball cards were from Star Picks, that those were beforehand. But at any rate, they came out at the same time. But the Reggie autograph didn't lead to anything, whereas the Star Picks cards really did. Instead, the Reggie auto was it was a card that appeared on the hobby, and we never knew what to do with it. We really didn't. It was tough to wrap our heads around it. A big part of why it was so difficult to comprehend was how rare it was, because there were only 2,500 copies of this card, and who knows how many actually came out of packs. So it was a card that it was really difficult to even see one of these cards. It was something that you really heard of. And there were three cards at the time that were that way. There was the 1989 Pro Set Santa Claus card, which was actually a promo card. It wasn't even released in packs. But you would see that in card shops, and it would sell for a huge amount of money because of just how few cards there were compared to the incredible number of collectors at the time. The number of collectors back in the early 90s, late 80s into the early 90s, was so many times bigger than what we have today. It's difficult to be able to help somebody to understand just how many, because you had all these kids who just normally would go through a couple of years of collecting, and then that was getting drawn out by the energy of the period. And so it was literally a percentage of all boys in America, and a lot of teenagers and adults were in the hobby as well, all combined together. And today, very few kids are even in the hobby. Very few teenagers are in the hobby. It's mostly adults. Probably more adults now than there was at the time, but when you look at the balance of all of that, when you went to a card show in the 1990s, it was packed. But there were so many card shows. It was all over. So the idea of being one of the few people to actually get one of these cards it was not the kind of thing that anybody could take seriously. So the 1989 Santa Claus card was legendary for its own reason. It wasn't a valid card. It was a promo card. Well, it was valid, but it wasn't a standard card. It was something adjacent to that. So it was really special. Then you had, following the Reggie auto, was the 1990 Pro Set hologram of the Vince Lombardi trophy. There were 4 times as many as that than the Reggie auto, but still, it was rare for you to ever come across one. And so between those 3 cards, they were kind of like, I apologize for saying this, the Holy Trinity. Those 3 cards were so special, so unique, so unusual in the hobby, and they acted together as a group of SP cards that you almost didn't even aspire to. It was kind of like that high water mark that you dream of. They were the equivalent of a Lamborghini Countach or a Ferrari Testarossa. If you're lucky enough to even see one, that's what you're blessed with. And everybody went, I'm going to have one of those one of these days. And no, you're not. Although the way things worked out, you can actually get your hands on those cards. I don't have the Reggie auto, but I do have both the hologram as well as the Santa Claus card. So they are attainable, but at the time, it really didn't seem like they were attainable unless you were just incredibly optimistic and incredibly naive of the odds, which, frankly, we were all naive of the odds. The autograph was intended to get people to open a bunch of packs, and it definitely did that, because in 1990, and 91, you really didn't have to earn pack sales. Well, you did over in basketball and you did in hockey. In football, it wasn't so much earning pack sales as much as earning your percentage of the pack sales in the market, because things were taking off really quickly there. But over in baseball, there was no real energy toward earning your place in the hobby. Everybody was selling more packs than they possibly could, but you wanted to get people buying more of your packs than anybody else. And that was really kind of the motivator. So the Reggie Auto was a really big deal for Upper Deck, and then every year they would continue to release an autograph, very rarely, or very difficult to come by in packs. And then you saw in 1991, Don Russ was doing their serial numbered cards, which was a way to get people to buy more packs. Score in 1990 had the Bo Jackson football baseball card. Just a normal card, but it helped to sell packs. That was the thing, get more people to sell packs. And in 1991, Topps did a contest that even if nobody ever won it, it sold so many packs. But by 1992, that was either no longer important or valid, because Upper Deck, after the baseball release, they stopped doing these autographs and packs for the most part. It gets a little bit complicated, but the thing was that the Reggie Auto was not the beginning of something in the future. It was just this weird anomaly. That was an amazing anomaly, but it was a standalone event. What we would see for autographs and packs actually came from Star Picks, through Pro Line, through Fleer, to Hoops, and eventually Score was getting into it. And it grew from there in a whole different path as Upper Deck kept putting out its every release. There was another Heroes card that had an autograph. So when you look back on it, it's easy to look back and go, oh, that's where autographs started. That's the way that it looks, but that wasn't it at the time. We were not looking at that card going, we're going to have tons of autographs and packs. We were looking at it as, I can't believe there's an autograph in a pack. That's as far as our thought process went. We weren't thinking about the next Upper Deck release. I wonder who's going to be the autograph. We were just so immersed in this one card. But again, it was the uniqueness of it. It was the fact that if you saw it, you were lucky. It was an amazing gift to the sports card world that helped us to wrap our head around the concept of SP cards that everybody kind of focuses in on, that are special cards that would pepper the hobby. And that would evolve. We would get into what would later be called manufactured scarcity. And that was, that's literally what this was. There were 2,500 cards. There was a minimal number that was produced. But that idea of more rare cards that are more special and something that you really needed to pursue was a big part of what drove the 90s. So that was really the legacy of that card. Still, it was an amazing card. But it wasn't the first time that we had a standalone card in baseball that was a modern day chase card of unimaginable proportions, because that really probably fits with the Darryl Strawberry 1983 Topps traded card. This is a card that, among other things, sparked the debate about what is a true rookie card. I don't want to get into that right here. Well, maybe I do want to get into it. I don't know. Let's see. The thing about this card is that it was rare in a different way, because this was not intentionally manufactured scarcity. Prior to this card, almost all cards were just normally released in packs. As far as mainstream cards went, there was also cards that you cut out off of boxes, and Kellogg's had cards, and there's all sorts of stuff outside. But for the main companies, whether it's Topps, Bowman, Don Russ, Fleer, all of those cards, you normally just got them out of packs. Topps started doing traded sets, and the reason they did that was they wanted to do something now that they had competition in the early 1980s with Fleer and Don Russ, they needed to remind everybody that they were the card company. They were the best, they were the biggest, they were the most important, or more correctly, they wanted to get people excited about Topps cards. So you collect your entire 792 Topps card set, I think it was 92 at that time. You collect that set and then it's over, right? Well, what if you added a box set later on that gave you more cards, whether it was players who were now on new teams or it was prospects that were coming up? Whatever that was, it was a new opportunity to get more cards because people were spending money on all three sets. The money was flowing. but it also gave kind of like a preview of the upcoming set. Not design-wise, it was the same design, but it was that bridge to get people excited about the next release, and it's got Topps in your head. Brilliant marketing, but not brilliant. The release format was not very well done. So they were not, Topps was in the 1950s when they were going head to head with Bowman. They were investing in the future. They didn't mind losing money because down the road it was going to pay off. That model was gone from the company. So they weren't interested in losing a bunch of money trying to normalize these traded sets. They wanted to make it a viable opportunity, and they wanted to do it with some loyalty, which is weird in a largely pre-card shop world, because where kids got cards was like at the corner store, at the grocery store. So you got a top salesman walking into a gas station saying, hey, so yeah, you buy 10 boxes of our cards every year. Buy these box sets too. The gas station is going to look and go, well, that's just like the candy. It just disappears. That whole box set is more expensive than the packs. Are people going to notice? To a lot of, well, probably to most retailers of cards, that looked like a waste of money. Why would anybody care? It's never existed before. It doesn't look special at all. What, now I've got to hawk these things? I just put the box out next to the gum and the gum disappears and the cards disappear at the same pace. I don't have to do any work. Now you want me to sell this stuff? It was not well structured. The hobby wasn't quite ready for it, but Topps needed to make it work. And they did their best, which in many ways wasn't very successful, or was not very well handled, because they didn't have the success of moving the amount of product to normalize it. And so for most collectors, they would find these Topps traded sets only at card shows. And they might be marked up, they might not. They still seemed kind of expensive. So for a lot of collectors, they never even considered the sets. It was just the random cards they would find. So this meant that these cards were a lot more rare. So when the Darryl Strawberry card hit its height, because he was having a phenomenal year, he had one card, and people started going after it. Well, the thing is, you got to track it down because it's not coming out of packs. It's coming out of these boxes that most people can't find. So you go to card shows, and now you got a whole bunch of vultures who are all trying to surround themselves around one carcass and try to get it. The card value skyrocketed. It went up. And it did so because of the fact that just like all the other 131 cards in the set, it was rare. But unlike the other 132 cards in the set, this was the one card everybody wanted to find because Darryl Strawberry was having a great year. They wanted his card. There was only one pro card, or there were probably 100,000 copies of it, but they were difficult to find that 100,000 copies of that card. And so everybody would, anytime they found them, would swarm around, and the value shot through the roof. We would see this in later years, starting in 1984, with the Don Mattingly card, where once he hit his stride and people got excited, there were 3 cards to be able to track down for Don, and they all went up in value because everybody was swarming around them. But not only were there 3 times as many options, every one of those was more prolific coming out of packs rather than the box sets. So the Darryl Strawberry card changed the way that cards seemed in modern day. Prior to that, modern cards, the new card was always more valuable than the old card until you get to the really old cards, then they're really expensive. Nobody was really paying attention to the new stars popping up with rookie cards in current day. There was a little bit of it. Fernando Valenzuela had opened that door, but it just wasn't that big of a deal until all of a sudden there's this one card that hit all the right marks. The hobby was not ready for it. The sales spaces were limited. Card shows were the big place where everybody came through, and that was an event where everybody came at the same time for the same experience. It was a player who was sensational his rookie year, firing up everybody in the entire league, and there weren't very many of these cards available where you could find them. The perfect storm to make a card that went viral. That's the term we would use today. That's what it did. It did exactly that. And it was a brand new card, and it created a precedent so that the Don Mattingly card was really riding on its coattails. When the Mattingly cards took off, they were just doing what the Darryl Strawberry card had already done, even though there were probably, I don't know, 20, 30 times as many Don Mattingly cards. They probably didn't get to be quite as expensive, but still, that was a new norm for collectors. Once they saw it one time, then it could happen again. So any new rookie that takes off, everybody rushes in there with that same mentality of what they experienced with the Strawberry card, even though the Strawberry card, the circumstances around it were very different. All right. Like I said, I'm going to go into that in more detail in, not so much that specifically. I'm going to talk more about it in the standalone video. But I do want to get on to the last of the topics, which is Bowman. Bowman is a sad case because so many collectors today don't consider it a valid card. I don't get this. I absolutely don't get this. There are a ton of collectors who are dead set that the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle card is his rookie card because the only thing that was before it was this second-rate card company called Bowman. And that is kind of an ethnocentric concept that they're pushing, which is that the world started with Topps without giving any respect for why Topps came around, because Bowman at the time was not as impressive as Topps. And so the idea is that either Topps saved the world from obscurity or Topps was the first company to take it seriously, whatever, I don't know. But that's unfair for Bowman because Bowman was started in 1939. Well, okay, no. Mr. Bowman ran Gum Incorporated. And Gum Incorporated was a pre-World War II company that made, wait for it, bubble gum. And he really liked what Gowdy had done with baseball cards, where for a number of years they put out an annual set. Now they couldn't keep it going in no small part because it was in the middle of the Great Depression, so it was pretty tough. And so they walked away from it, but Mr. Bowman looked and said, I want to do that, but I want to make it stick, and I think I can. And so he put his heart and soul into making a card set that, starting in 1939, was called Play Ball. This was a card set where for 3 years he made different cards, and you could tell that there was a lot of care put into these card sets. And he would have continued to make these cards in great quality all through the mid-40s if it wasn't for a little something called World War II, where a priority shift happened and paper was considered to be more important for the war effort than for kids' bubblegum fillers. And that's a shame, because whatever Play Ball could have been, that stopped cold after 1941. Now, after the war ended, we got an opportunity for Bowman to return, and I say Bowman because it's not just Mr. Bowman, but Gum Incorporated needed to get re-incorporated, and he turned it into a company called Bowman Gum Incorporated. I think that was the official name. At any rate, instead of re-establishing Play Ball, he established the baseball cards with the same name, Bowman. Now, unfortunately, he didn't put the care into the design of the card. There was literally no design on the card. It was just a picture. They were going to be getting back into it. And as they got back into this whole baseball card manufacturing, the card sizes were changing, and they got over into art as opposed to photos, which I think was a wonderful, gorgeous, gorgeous art. But there was no design on the card, and for a while there wasn't even a name on the front of the card. So the cards lacked the heart that had been such an indicative part of the Play Ball cards. And that's unfortunate. So it means that by the time that Topps started to get involved in making baseball cards in 51 and 52, they didn't really have much competition with Bowman in terms of the aesthetics of the card. Instead, Topps was able to come in and make a card that looked actually a lot like the Play Ball cards had done. So what Play Ball did in terms of making a card that was more impressive than what Gowdy had made, Topps now made a card that was more impressive than what Bowman was making. And Bowman responded, but Bowman had a tough time really figuring things out, mainly because Mr. Bowman was no longer running Bowman. Now it was a company that was owned by a company. And so this was kind of the thing that they did, and they didn't have anybody who was able to go in there and really invest in trying to make these cards better. They tried, but it was all half-hearted. Topps, on the other hand, was betting the rent on it. They didn't mind losing money on it because in the long run, they were going to win. It was going to be a war of attrition that Bowman ended up losing. not because Bowman ran out of money, but because Bowman got to the point where the parent company went, it's not worth it. And they just sold the company to Topps. They basically took a write-off and moved on with their lives. And Topps all of a sudden got a free run at having a monopoly that they would have to work at trying to maintain, and they'd work really hard at it. But the whole thing about Bowman not being a valid card is mainly disappointing because of the fact that Topps and Bowman had different contracts, which means there are certain players that only had Bowman cards until Topps took over. So at 1956, 1957, that's the rookie card of a player who'd been playing for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. That's the reality of it, is when somebody decides to go in and say, well, that isn't worth my time, you're blocking out an entire history. Now, I know that that does raise the question of, okay, well, what about star in basketball? They're different situations. They are different situations, and I acknowledge the argument that's made. But the big difference is that Bowman and play ball had been continuous, and if it wasn't for the war, it really is a continuation of the early years of baseball cards, the beginning of pre-modern baseball cards that just Topps took over. But they were able to be successful at it. They were continuous at it. They invested in it. It was available everywhere that they could reach. I mean, it was really a national affair. Topps was able to outmaneuver them in that regard, but in the case of Star, it was just a whole different conversation. Bowman was Topps before Topps. As simple as that. And it's a company that really needs to be given more respect than it's being given today, which is, again, a real shame. But like I said, I want to get more into that in a standalone video coming up. So definitely look out for that. Look out for all 3 videos as they come up. Certainly subscribe if you haven't done so, and you can ring the bell to be notified for when these videos come out. And yeah, I really hope that you enjoy learning about sports cards through these videos. Thank you very much for watching.